How's it going? So let's take a look at the next group of writers here. Nella Larsen, another writer of the Harlem Renaissance, one of my favorite. She wrote 2 novels, Quicksand and Passing, and a number of short stories. Here's a picture of her here. So she's considered perhaps the most important novelist of the Harlem Renaissance. That's debatable, obviously, but this book, Passing, I read it a couple years ago. It's a great book about race and gender as 2 childhood friends, Claire and Irene, meet up after many years. One passes and the other decides not to. We saw this before, this idea of passing, and the novel is called Passing, and it's very interesting to see this idea of interracial marriage, whites, African Americans, how they interact, and how some perceive the other as a group when, for example, if someone passes and that person's in a group of non-African Americans, what different exchanges go on and things that are said. So that's an interesting novel to look at also. F. Scott Fitzgerald, writer of The Great Gatsby. Maybe you read this one in high school. I think I did too, looking back in a lot of these works today. So here's a picture of him, troublemaker. You could tell, it's all dressed up as people did in the Roaring Twenties. Jazz age writer of the Roaring Twenties during a time of generational clashes between the nouveau riche liberal young and traditional America. And we've seen this type of clash before in Henry James, for example, between the British, the Europeans as tradition, and the younger Americans that go abroad. But here, we've got that same clash, but the whole thing takes place in the United States. So some of his works include This Side of Paradise, Tales of the Jazz Age, and you can do a little bit more research on those in general. All the Sad Young Men. This was written at a down point in his life, and you can see how that's reflected there. Tender as the Night. Same subject matter that we're going to see in a lot of his works here. But The Great Gatsby here is his claim to fame, dramatic portrait of the jazz age and obsessions of fortune and fame. So these characters here, you could see how they show ambition above ethics. And so inside of if you've read the novel or if you need to brush up on it, but it talks about the underpinnings of avarice and self-interest and their consequences. So many of the themes, as you can see, are some of it is in other works: marriage, deceit, class and society, failed American dream, wealth, some compassion in there, interchange, relationships, etc. So in this particular story, to absolutely sum it up in just a short paragraph, we've got Nick Carraway's cousin Daisy Buchanan and her husband Tom's Lovell, Myrtle Wilson, and Jay Gatsby. So you got a whirlwind of infidelities, ambitions, love, secrets, and violence. So there's marital infidelity in here. You've got the themes of violence, the guy shot in the pool in the end, car crash. So there's a lot of action going on in the interchange between the characters and the reasons that they're hanging out or talk to each other, or this whole idea of how America was like in the Roaring Twenties. Great writer William Faulkner here. As you can see, we're progressing along with the years now. This man passed away in 1962, not too long ago for some of us. Maybe it is for some of you, but we're approaching a modern era here. Some of these writers still going to be alive today. So, a writer from the South that wrote about the South. He's known for his fictional county in Mississippi that he wrote about. And a lot of these different places you might want to remember. A lot of some of the characters, the families in some of his works are repeated, and these are motifs that are characters that are repeated that you should look at and remember, because these are the backbone of a lot of his work here. So he won 2 Pulitzer Prizes and a Nobel Prize in Literature. Here's a picture of him, another portrait there against the wall. So he wrote with a stream of consciousness, and I mentioned this before, the style of James Joyce Ulysses. Just let it go. That's a stream of consciousness. What's the purpose of that? It's supposed to be connected right to the thought. And I mentioned before at the beginning of this whole idea of Darwin and Freud, Nietzsche, Marx, etc. And this is connected, a lot of it sometimes maybe, you may find a connection here with Freud's idea of the unconscious. So if we're able to connect you know, the novel wired up, right up to the character's brain. It makes it look, you know, not worrying about punctuation or any of the words or sentence structures. Just the person's, write down exactly the way the person's thinking. Yeah, don't revise it. Just put it down the way it is. It makes it look like it's real, and that has an appeal. Obviously, in an extreme case, like Finnegan's Wake, well, for me, that's an extreme case. Ulysses, another case. When I went to Ireland, I was on one of my trips to Ireland. I bought that novel, and I was, you know, I hit the first 30 pages, and I ended up giving it to the guy that came around to check the tickets on the train because I didn't understand anything about it, even though my professor told me that that was one of the best books that was ever written. So I've been trying to take another hack at that since then. Obviously, you can go into Wikipedia and see what it's about, but it's nice to just try to read it on your own, just like they did back in the old days before we had the internet that did all these things for us. So it's a clash of older traditions, antebellum South, and younger generations. Once again, gender, class, race, important issues to see in a lot of his works. A sense of time is discombobulated, flashback sequence perspectives, and a lot of this is connected to the modernist style and the stream of consciousness that's going on here. You've got the themes, the country, people that are connected to the earth versus the city, which is the industrialization and the dehumanizing part of that, the detachment from what's natural, the decline of the South, contradictions and conscience. But race is the most prominent theme in his work. So the Compson family, you could see runs through some of his novels, like The Sound and the Fury, Absalom, and the family tree can be traced. Someone had traced this online. I took a look at it from 1699 all the way up to 1945. So just take a look at this idea of a stream of consciousness from chapter 1 of The Sound of Fury. And check out the way it flows. I could hear a clock, and I could hear Caddy standing behind me, and I could hear the roof. It's still raining. Caddy said, "I hate rain, I hate everything." And then her head came to my lap, and she was crying, holding me, and I began to cry. Then I looked at the fire again, and the bright, smooth shapes went again. I could hear the clock and the roof and Caddy. So there's no order in that. I mean, it's just free-flowing ideas, free-flowing thought, and you can see how that's connected to this idea of stream of consciousness, of just, you know, connecting a wire to the brain and putting it right down on paper. He also had another trilogy of the Snopes family here in the same county, and these other novels you could see here have the same repetition, and these characters are also repeated in a lot of other novels. So a lot of writers at this time will connect a lot of their characters throughout different novels, and you can see this not only in the United States, but in other writers too, like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who wrote 100 Years of Solitude, and a lot of his characters are repeated in the places too, in his writings. So Barn Burning is a short story, but it's also a prequel to the trilogy. It's a story told from a child's perspective about class and vengeance. And you could see here, going back to the Snopes family, they have clashes with the generational Sartoris clan. In the Snopes family, look at this slowly, corruption, pedophilia, murder, racism, mental instability, sexual depravity, pornography, etc. So a lot of these depictions that are laid out here could be connected to this idea of the grotesque character that we looked at before, that here are being described in a lot of these different novels. So the fictional county here is based on Lafayette, Mississippi, where Faulkner lived. So imagine you're from that county, and you know, he says, yeah, these are based on other people, yeah, these are based on characters from his own county. Obviously, some people criticize his depictions there, even though, you know, the Southern Renaissance here is sometimes called. It's you know, this is where he grew up. This is a literary representation of it. And if these characters that he is describing are similar to the people that he grew up with, you know, obviously the people in the area are going to be critical of some of his depictions there. So that's a look at this group of writers here.